marketplace on Telesia Prime bustled with alien nobles, merchants, and slave trainers. Shiny stalls shimmered under twin suns. Among the crowd, a small trembling creature sat behind bars, chained and barely breathing. It looked weak, skinny, scarred, and oddly shaped. The locals laughed and mocked it. To them, it was just another rejected pet from a forgotten world. The creature was a human. No name, no voice, only a number on his collar. 3117. He didn't even remember who gave it to him. He had been sold from ship to ship, planet to planet, always treated like a fragile toy. But inside those dull eyes was something no one cared to see, a burning memory of Earth and the fire of survival. Princess Kailari of the Vayari Empire walked past the cages. Her tail flicked in annoyance as her guards followed. She was tall, armored in obsidian plates with bioluminescent tattoos glowing faintly. The crowd bowed, afraid to meet her gaze. She was not kind. She was not merciful. She was raised to rule with strength. She paused in front of the human's cage, not because she cared, but because she was bored. Her voice cut the air cold and sharp. "What is that?" "A defective Terran," the merchant said with a sneer. "No venom, no claws, no threat. Some buy them as stress toys." Kailari squinted. The human stared back. Weak, yes, but something in his posture. It wasn't begging. It wasn't fear. It was stillness. Readiness. She smirked. "Fine, I'll take it. I need entertainment." Back at her palace, she had the human cleaned, barely fed, and tossed into her war beast arena. The floor was red from past blood. She expected him to cower, maybe amuse her by running. But instead he stood, alert, watching. The beast entered, a low-skulled predator with tusks and armored scales. It had torn through gladiators twice the human's size. Her courtiers laughed. He won't last a breath. But the human didn't run. He moved slow, measured. As the beast charged, he rolled. Beneath the strike, grabbed broken bone from the arena floor and jammed it into the beast's eye. It screamed. She rose from her throne in surprise. Kailari thought it was luck, until he leapt again, this time using the beast's own weight, to break its leg. Within minutes, the monster collapsed, dead. The human didn't roar. He didn't celebrate. He just looked up at her with calm, unshaken eyes. Whispers filled the palace. He was trained, some said. A warrior? Others questioned. Kailari ordered him brought forward. Bloody, tired, but standing tall, he walked with a strange pride. Her guards placed a spear at his throat, but he didn't flinch. "What are you?" she asked, voice low. "I'm human," he replied simply. Something twisted in her chest. Not fear, not curiosity. Challenge. She had bought him as a pet, but now she didn't know what he was. She assigned him to her personal chambers. Not out of kindness, but to keep him close. Over days, she observed, he ate little, spoke less, but he watched everything. He moved with purpose, and her soldiers, who once laughed at him, now avoided his gaze. Then one evening, she found him training, in the courtyard, alone. With nothing but a wooden stick, he mimicked forms she had never seen, fluid, sharp, deadly. Her tail flicked again. That night she couldn't sleep. Something had changed. Not just in the human, but in her. The palace began to shift, quietly, in ways Princess Kailari had never allowed. Servants whispered behind tall crystal walls. Guards became strangely respectful around the human. And Kailari herself noticed something unsettling. Her own thoughts lingered on him too long. She had expected fear or obedience. Instead, the human walked the palace as if he belonged. He never broke rules, but neither did he crawl. When addressed, he answered directly, eyes never dropping. That was rare on this world, especially from a creature considered a pet. Kailari summoned him again. This time, in the warrior hall where only generals stood. Her advisors protested. "He's not trained. He's not even one of us." But she silenced them with a single glance. When the human entered, dressed in basic armor meant for slaves. The generals mocked him. One even tossed him a dull blade and challenged him to a mock fight. He didn't smile. He simply nodded. The duel began, and within seconds, the general was on the ground. The blade was at his throat. No killing blow, but no hesitation either. The room fell silent. The human stepped back and bowed slightly, not out of fear but respect. Kalari's eyes narrowed. There was no luck here, no accident. He had learned, adapted, and quickly. That night she sent for his records. What she found stunned her. Earth, death world, unclaimed by any empire. Its gravity, toxins, and predators were fatal to most species. Its people, few in number among the stars, were considered uncivilized, but the reports painted a different truth. Humans survived anything. They didn't just adapt, they changed the rules. There were rumors they could tame beasts that destroyed warlords. They formed bonds across species. And once provoked, they never forgot. She stared at his profile in the file, then out toward the courtyard where he trained again, stick in hand, alone under the starlight. The next morning she gave him a real weapon, a blade forged from obsidian and plasma core, rare, powerful. Her guards gasped. For a human? She answered without blinking. He's more than that. He took the weapon with a slight nod. No thanks. Just readiness. Training changed. No longer in secret. Now he faced elite Vayari soldiers in full combat trials. He didn't always win, but he never broke. Each time he lost, he returned stronger, faster, sharper. Kalari found herself watching. From balconies, heart racing. She had never respected anyone below her, yet here he was, rising fast, no matter how low he started. One evening, during a sandstorm drill, she joined him on the practice ground. The storm howled around them. Visibility was near zero. Most retreated. He didn't. She approached. He turned to her, eyes steady, body covered in dust and sweat. "Why do you train so hard?" she asked. He answered, voice low. "Because one day I'll need to protect something." "Protect what?" she asked. "I don't know yet," he replied. The wind roared between them, but her chest felt oddly warm. That night, she didn't return to her chambers. She watched him through the storm from the shadows until he collapsed from exhaustion, still gripping the blade. The palace whispered louder now. Some feared him, others admired him, but all agreed he was no longer a pet. Kalari wasn't sure when she began dreaming of him. Only that for the first time in her life, her dreams made her feel weak. Days turned into weeks, and the palace guards no longer looked at the human with mockery. Instead, they stepped aside when he passed. Some asked him questions. Others invited him to spar. He never showed pride, but he never backed down. Princess. Kalari watched it all from behind her carved glass windows. Every morning he trained before sunrise. Every night he stood guard at the edge of her chamber doors, even when she didn't ask him to. Not because he was ordered, but because he chose to. Her advisors grew nervous. "He's gaining too much respect," one said. "The soldiers whisper about him. Even your war beasts respond to him." She raised an eyebrow. "Is that fear I hear in your voice?" "No, Princess," the advisor bowed quickly. "Only concern." Kalari dismissed him, but inside, even she felt a strange shift. The human's presence disturbed her, not as a threat, but something more dangerous. She found herself wanting to speak with him, to ask him things, to understand what drove his fire. That evening, she did something she never had before. She invited him to dine with her. He entered the hall silently. He was cleaned, armored in deep blue robes, his blade at his side. The nobles stared, confused and angry. A human sitting at the royal table. Kalari ignored their eyes. "Sit," she said. He sat calmly, posture perfect. When food arrived, he didn't eat right away. He studied the table, the people, the smells. Then he picked the simplest thing and chewed slowly. "You don't trust the food?" she asked. "I don't trust anything that looks too perfect," he replied. She almost smiled. The nobles tried to challenge him, mock him, test his manners, but the human never raised his voice. He answered questions simply, but always made the one asking feel small. His words were honest, not polished, but they cut sharper than any blade. After the meal, Kalari dismissed the crowd and walked with him through the palace gardens. Alien flowers glowed under the moons. Creatures chirped in the trees. It should have been peaceful, but something heavy floated in the air. "You've changed things," she said finally. "I only survived," he answered. "No, you made others see you. You made them doubt what they believed." "I didn't ask them to." She stopped walking and faced him. "Then what do you want?" He looked into her eyes, unblinking. "To not be owned." Her breath caught, just for a second. Not fear, not anger, guilt. She had taken him like property, like a joke, and now here he stood, stronger than half her army, wiser than her commanders, and still, he hadn't demanded anything. That night she couldn't sleep. Her dreams were filled with strange visions. Him, standing at her side during battle. Him, bleeding, for her. Him, looking at her like she was more than just a ruler. The next day she ordered her guards to take him to the outer border. A rebellion had flared up. She wanted him tested under fire. When the gates opened, the soldiers expected the human to flinch, but he didn't. He mounted the beast they gave him, fixed his blade, and led the charge. Kalari watched from her command ship as he dove into the chaos. His movements were swift, deadly, precise. He didn't just fight. He led. Her men followed without hesitation. By nightfall, the enemy had fled. The human returned, dust-covered and wounded, but alive. A strange silence filled the war camp as he approached. Kalari stepped forward and met him. "Why didn't you fall back?" He looked at her. "Because your people needed someone who wouldn't." For a second, her chest tightened. This wasn't a servant anymore. He was something else. Something dangerous. Something unforgettable. The fire in the border camp had burned low, but tension still hung thick in the air. Soldiers whispered stories about the human's fearlessness, how he had turned the tide with nothing but instinct and speed. Even seasoned captains admitted he fought like a predator born in war. Kalari stayed silent during the return to the capital. She stood at the front of her warship, arms crossed, her mind full of thoughts she couldn't escape. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him standing tall, bleeding, but unbothered. And every time, something inside her shifted. When they arrived, at the palace, crowds had already gathered. The news had traveled fast. The human was no longer seen as a curiosity. He was seen as something else now. Something dangerous. Something worthy. That night, Kalari summoned him again. Not to test him, not to mock him, but to speak. He entered her private chamber quietly. He was cleaned, dressed in dark armor and carried no weapon. His eyes met hers without hesitation. "You led my men," she said, pouring 2 cups of silver tea. "I led them because they needed direction," he replied. "And they followed you, even though you are human." They followed strength, not blood. She handed him the cup. Their fingers brushed. For a moment, neither spoke. She sat down across from him, her voice lower now. "When I first saw you, I thought you were weak. A pet. A thing to entertain me. And now?" he asked calmly. "I don't know what you are," she whispered. He didn't answer. He sipped the tea, gaze steady. Outside, the wind howled through the high towers of the palace, but the room felt smaller, warmer. He wasn't just another warrior anymore. His presence had weight, like gravity pulling everything closer. Kalari leaned forward slightly. "You could leave, you know. You're no longer a slave. I gave that order this morning." He looked at her, but his face didn't change. And, go where? Anywhere. I don't belong to anywhere, he said. I'm still figuring out what I want, but I know I'm not done here. Silence stretched between them. You confuse me, she said. You confuse yourself, he replied. For the first time her mask cracked. She laughed, a soft, bitter sound. I rule planets, human, but I can't rule you. You never tried, he said. She stood up and walked to the window looking out over her empire. Lights from the city flickered like stars below. I've never allowed anyone beside me. Never trusted anyone. Never needed anyone. He said nothing. He didn't need to. She already felt the answer. Later that night, she couldn't sleep again. Her mind was filled with flashes of battles, of his voice, his strength, his calm. Something unfamiliar settled in her chest. Not weakness, not fear. Longing. The next day, she took him on a tour of the War Academy. Cadets stopped their training, to salute, not to her, but to him. They knew what he had done. He had earned their respect, not through titles, but through pain and blood. Kalari stopped in front of a stone wall, carved with the names of honored warriors. She looked at the blank space near the top. I want to place your name here. He looked at the wall, then at her. That won't change what I am. No, she said softly, but it might change what we become. His eyes narrowed slightly, but he nodded. Then I accept. Their hands brushed again, and this time neither pulled away. The palace began to feel different. Where once it was filled with silence and commands, now quiet conversation stopped when the human entered. Servants bowed to him, not from fear, but respect. Guards stood taller around him. Even Kalari's personal beast, a fire-eyed predator named Sirlan, no longer growled when he passed. Kalari noticed it all. She said nothing, but inside she was no longer sure where her world ended and his began. One evening, she walked into the training yard to find him teaching young cadets. Not with words, but through movement. He showed them how to stay low, how to strike quick, how to survive when the body was weak but the mind still strong. The cadets followed him like he was one of them. Or better, Kalari stood in the shadows and watched. She wasn't jealous, but she felt something tighten in her chest. He was no longer just hers. Later that night, at the top of the palace tower, she found him standing alone, watching the stars. This world doesn't feel like mine anymore, she said quietly. He turned, surprised to hear her speak with such softness. Maybe it's changing. She walked beside him. Or maybe I am. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she asked, if you could go back to your world, and would you? He didn't answer right away. Then he looked at her. I'm not sure I have a world to return to. Maybe I'm meant to build one. With me? She asked before she could stop herself. His expression didn't change, but his eyes did. There was warmth in them now, and something deeper. If you ask, he said. Kalari's heart raced. No one had ever spoken to her like that, not with defiance, not with desire. She had always been the one in control, but with him, the ground felt even, maybe even tilted, but not everyone was pleased with this change. In the lower halls of the palace, 3 generals gathered in secret. They whispered about the human, about his influence, about the princess's strange behavior. She's becoming soft, one growled. She stares at him like he matters, another hissed. The third, a scarred warrior named Varn, slammed his fist on the table. He's just a human. He was bought like meat, and now he walks among us like a king. We should remove him. One whispered. No, Varn said coldly. We break him. In front of her. That night, while the human trained in the outer fields, a message came from the princess. It asked him to meet her privately, in the echo, chambers beneath the palace. But when he arrived, she wasn't there. Instead, Varn stood waiting, flanked by 2 armored guards. You don't belong here, Varn said. The human narrowed his eyes. Then why are you so afraid? Varn lunged. No warning. Just a blade drawn and aimed for the heart. The fight was fast. Brutal. The guards joined in. But the human had learned their styles. He twisted, struck, endured. The echo of steel rang through the chamber. By the end, the two guards were unconscious. Varn was on his knees, bleeding, panting. Kylari arrived too late, but she saw the result. Her human stood above the broken general, cut and bruised, but standing tall. She stared at him. At the violence, at the power, at the choice he made, not to kill even though he had the chance. Varn spat blood. This is what you protect? A beast in human skin? Kylari stepped forward, eyes blazing. No, I protect the only one who still knows mercy. She took the human's hand, and the court would remember that moment forever. The silence after the fight echoed through the palace longer than any war horn. Varn had been taken away on a stretcher, unconscious and humiliated. His rank stripped within hours, but the damage was deeper than a single broken general. The council now feared what the princess had allowed to grow. They no longer saw the human as a pet. They saw him as a threat. Kylari's chambers became quieter. Visitors hesitated before entering. Whispers filled the halls. Some called her enchanted, others claimed she was losing her mind. A princess brought to her knees by a Terran, but Kylari didn't care. For the first time, she had someone by her side who wasn't trying to use her, fear her, or worship her. The human didn't flinch when she was angry. He didn't bow when she entered. He simply looked at her like she was real. And that terrified her more than any assassin ever had. One night, she called him to her private quarters. No armor, no guards. He came in, calm as always. I should send you away, she said, standing near the window. Why? He asked. Because you're not safe here, not anymore. They want to break you again, or worse. He stepped closer. Let them try. She turned. Her expression was unreadable. Why do you stay? Because you haven't told me to leave. The words hit harder than a blade. Her breath caught. If I told you now, would you go? He looked at her for a long time, then shook his head. No. The air between them became heavy. Neither moved. Then, slowly, she stepped closer, her hand rising toward his chest. Her fingers hovered over the scar that crossed his collarbone. She had seen him bleed for her, fight for her, change for her. Now he stood still, waiting, not demanding, not taking, just waiting. She touched the scar gently. You're not what I expected, she whispered. And you're not what I feared, he replied. Before she could speak again, a knock shattered the moment. A servant entered, trembling. Your Highness, the Grand Council demands your presence. Kylari nodded. I'll be there. When the servant left, she turned back to him. They will challenge me tonight. Do they know I'll be standing beside you? She smiled faintly. That's what they fear most. Later that evening, the Grand Council gathered inside the Hall of Stars. The ceiling reflected the constellations of every world under Veari rule. The nobles stood in long robes, masks hiding their faces. One by one they spoke. Of danger, of honor, of tradition. Then the real attack came. You risk the throne, one voice said. By placing a human at your side, you break our ways. Kylari stood in the center, her chin held high. I break what no longer serves. Another hissed, He is not of us. He is more than any of you, she answered. The chamber roared in protest. Then the doors opened. The human walked in, uninvited, but unshaken. He wore no crown, no robe, just his armor, marked with scars and dust. The nobles went silent. Kylari looked at them all. This man fought for us when others fled. He led warriors who refused to follow their own generals. He bled for this empire, without asking for a name or a place. She stepped toward him. I will not apologize for trusting someone who has earned it more than any of you. The human stood quietly beside her. And for the first time in Vayari history, the Princess of 1,000 Systems chose to stand with a Terran, not as master or ruler, but as equal. Outside the hall, the stars continued to burn. But inside, something greater had been set on fire. The Hall of Stars had never seen silence like that before. Even the noble masks couldn't hide the shock in their posture. A human had stood beside their princess, and she had not flinched. That single moment rewrote centuries of law. But power does not fade quietly. The next day, Kelari received a message wrapped in black flame, a symbol of the Outer Council. These were not politicians. These were warlords who ruled the edges of empire with blood and fear. And they had one message: surrender the Terran, or face civil war. Kelari stared at the message as it burned out in her palm. Around her, the room remained still. Her advisors shifted nervously, waiting for her command. She gave none. Instead, she left the room and went straight to him. He was training again, shirt off, muscles marked with bruises and fading scars. When he saw her, he stopped. He didn't need to ask. Her eyes told him everything. "They want me dead," he said quietly. "They want to break me through you," she corrected. He picked up his blade and rested it on his shoulder. "Then I'll leave." "No," she said firmly. "You leave, they'll still come. You stay, they'll still come. The only difference is, if you're beside me, I'm not alone." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. Later that night, Kelari stood on the palace wall watching flames in the distance. The warlords were coming. Their ships lit the skies like falling stars. The capital had to prepare for siege. She gathered her generals. Some resisted, some warned, but most stood ready, because they had seen what she saw. A change, a leader not just born of bloodlines but of fire and steel. The human walked into the war room beside her. No one dared question it now, but in the shadows of the palace, betrayal moved like poison. A masked noble, jealous, bitter, afraid, slipped into Kelari's private quarters. He didn't carry a weapon, just a vial of neural toxin meant for her cup. He failed, because the human was already there watching. The moment the noble uncorked the vial, a hand grabbed his wrist and twisted hard. The vial shattered. The man screamed. In seconds, he was on the floor, unconscious. Kelari arrived moments later. "You were already watching?" she asked. The human looked down at the failed assassin. "I watch everything near you." Something broke inside her, a wall she had built since childhood. Cold pride, armor-thick emotions, now melted in the warmth of his quiet devotion. She stepped closer, not as a ruler, not as a warrior, as a woman. "You were once my property," she said softly. "I never was," he answered. She smiled. "Exactly." Then, as if the universe held its breath, she leaned in. Their lips met, soft, sure, silent. In that kiss was everything left unspoken. When they pulled apart, she whispered, "If I fall tomorrow, promise me you'll burn this world to protect our name." He touched her cheek. "If you fall, I fall with you." The sky exploded in warning drums. The warlords had arrived, and as the horns of war echoed across the city, the human and the princess stood side by side at the gate, no longer ruler and weapon. Now, they were something greater. The sky above the capital turned red with fire trails as warships descended like wolves from the stars. The Outer Council had sent their finest. Armored carriers, predator beasts, and warriors trained only for conquest. Inside the palace walls, soldiers took their positions. Catapults loaded. Cannons warmed. War chants began to rise. But the human stood silent at the front gate, holding nothing but his obsidian blade. He looked not at the sky but at the men and women around him. They were afraid, and he wasn't. Kelari walked to his side, dressed not in her royal robes, but in battle gear. Her face was painted in the war markings of the old queens. Her people gasped when they saw her like that. She raised her hand. "This world will not fall today. The crowd roared. Then she turned to him. You stand as more than my champion. You are my equal. He looked back at her. Then we bleed together. The first enemy wave hit fast. Sky beasts dove through the clouds, dropping fire on the outer wall. Explosions cracked the stone, but the defenders held. And at the front, the human moved like lightning. He leapt into fire, cut through enemy soldiers with raw speed and savage grace. He took hits. He fell once, but he always stood again. Kailari fought beside him, her blade a blur of light and fury. They moved as one, covered each other, protected their people. Even the enemy forces began to falter. That's not a pet, they shouted in fear. That's a Terran warbringer. But the enemy commanders pushed harder. At mid-battle, a massive armored beast was unleashed, 20 feet tall, covered in plasma spikes. It tore through Kailari's guards like paper. Soldiers screamed and scattered. Kailari tried to stop it, but it struck her hard, sending her flying into the stone wall. She collapsed and didn't rise. The battlefield paused. The human saw her fall. Something inside him broke. He dropped his blade and ran straight toward the beast. Unarmed, unafraid, it charged him like a tank. At the last second, he ducked, climbed onto its back and drove a shard of broken armor straight into its neck. It roared, flailing, trying to shake him off. But he held on and kept stabbing. Finally, the beast collapsed. The field went silent. He crawled to Kailari, bleeding from his arm and side. She opened her eyes slowly, gasping. You're alive, he whispered. You're insane, she replied, weakly. Only for you, she smiled. Then rise, human. The war's not done. Together they stood again. With their courage burning like a signal, the soldiers charged once more. The enemy broke under the fury of a people united. By nightfall, the warlords had fled. Victory was theirs. Later, the palace held no grand ceremony. No formal speeches. Just the quiet hum of life returning. Citizens lit candles in the streets for the fallen. And at the heart of the city, the princess stood on her balcony, beside her human, no longer a pet, no longer a curiosity, now her partner. You saved more than my life, she said softly. You saved who I could be. He touched the side of her face. And you gave me a name again. She looked up at him, then stepped closer. Then take what is yours. What's that? She leaned in. Me. Their lips met once more, not in secrecy this time, but under the open stars. The people below saw. They cheered, they cried, because the story of a human pet had ended. With a predator who rose so high the crown itself had to bow, and the princess, fierce, feared, and proud, had chosen to yield not in weakness, but in love.